I have a hot take for you today. Even after a dismal performance, I think the Jets' offense is going to be okay. Their defense, well, that's a different story. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, September 16th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, we are now 2 weeks into the season in 2025, and I think we now have enough data to start forming opinions on the Jets and this new regime. And there's not a lot to feel good about right now. The Jets are 0-2. On today's show, we're going to talk about how it's easy to lose faith in the front office because a lot of their moves are not working out, and the defense looks like a mess. And if you watch the Week 2 game against the Buffalo Bills, the offense also looked like a mess. But ironically, that's the thing I have the most optimism about. And we're going to get to all of this on today's show, but let's start by talking about the offense. And I think that me saying that the offense has a chance to be okay is going to be viewed as a hot take right now, because what they did on Sunday against the Buffalo Bills was a completely indefensible performance. But I went back and watched the film on what the Jets did offensively, and there were some fluky things that happened in this game. I mean, this game was pretty much over by the time the Jets finished with their scripted plays. In the NFL, usually the first 15 or so plays, some teams do it more, some teams get to 20, some teams get to 25, but the first handful of plays are scripted. These are plays that you're going to call, that you practice all week, and you're going into the game knowing that you're going to run these plays no matter what. And by the time the Jets were done with these plays, I mean, it was pretty much garbage time. So some unusual things happened. The Bills had a couple of really good defensive calls against the Jets' scripted plays. Sometimes you just have to tip your cap to the opponent. But this game got away from the Jets really early. And, it's difficult to draw sweeping conclusions about the offense in a game where so much happened in the early stages to put the Jets behind the 8 ball, so to speak. The other factor in this game, which is less encouraging, is most of the Jets after watching the film, I came to the conclusion, which is the same conclusion I had watching the game live, that most of the Jets' offensive struggles in this game were about the quarterback. Justin Fields was horrendous in this game. And watching the passing plays, on almost every single one of them, he had an open receiver who he either did not throw the ball to or who he threw a completely errant pass to. And, going back to when the Jets signed Fields, even before the Jets signed Fields, and, this offseason, Fields was the guy who was, I don't know if I would say my first choice, but the guy I viewed as the least bad of a lot of bad options. I think everybody acknowledged that the Jets signing Fields left you knowing that you were going to have some games where he was just going to look horrible. I mean, that's been the story of Justin Fields' career. When he plays well, he looks really good. When he plays poorly, he looks really, really bad. And Sunday's game may have been the worst game of his career. He ended with a QBR of 1.1. That is the lowest mark Justin Fields has ever had in an NFL game. One of the things is that if you look at week 1, the Jets offense moved the ball really well. You look at week 2, the Jets offense could not do anything. And you saw the good of Fields and the bad of Fields. But the reason that I still have optimism in the offense is that we've seen a formula that can work. And that was the week 1 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where the Jets leaned on their offensive line. And the offensive line did not play as well in week 2 against Buffalo. Armand Membou, the rookie, did not resemble the week 1 dominant player who was shutting down TJ Watt. Membou had some struggles against another very, very talented pass rusher in Joey Bosa. But I think that there is enough talent on this offensive line that they will still have weeks where they look really good. In week 1, the Jets did not move the ball because Tanner Engstrand drew up a million brilliant plays. They moved the ball because they controlled the line of scrimmage. And when you have the ability to control the line of scrimmage, you can move the ball in this league. You can make plays. And we know that the Jets have limitations at the skill spots. Garrett Wilson's a good number one receiver. Breece Hall, who did not really have a good statistical game, still is hitting the holes hard. And that gives me hope that Breece is going to continue to look good. And I think that you'll see results that resemble week one more than results that resemble week two. One of the things I say frequently on this show is that how you achieve results is as important projecting the future as getting the results themselves. And even though Breece Hall did not really have that good of a game in week two, I still saw him being decisive, making his cuts. And I still saw him not leaving yards on the field. And that's a positive thing. Now, we know the other skill spots, there are issues. There has not been a number two receiver who stepped up in the first 2 weeks for the Jets. And you look at some of the other skill players you were hoping that would maybe rise with an opportunity. Braylon Allen has shown very little. I had hopes for Braylon Allen entering the season that maybe he could be a good complement to Breece Hall. Maybe he could even look like a number one back in this league. Through 2 weeks, we have not seen that. At the tight end position, you're not getting a whole lot. It's not a surprise that Mason Taylor's off to a slow start. It's something I warned about the day the Jets drafted him, that tight end is a difficult position to transition to in the NFL. But you just have not gotten the rookie breakout that maybe you were hoping for from Mason Taylor. It's going to take time. I'm not saying you write Taylor off. I still think he's got potential to be a number one tight end in this league. It's just not happening immediately. But there are enough pieces on this offense when Fields plays well to put together a functional unit and a unit that can have good games. One of the issues, though, is that you're dealing with one of the most inconsistent quarterbacks in the league. And none of this is a surprise. And one of the reasons I feel like I'm avoiding a meltdown over this is we've pretty much gotten what I've expected the first 2 weeks. We've seen kind of the range of outcomes with Justin Fields. Now, maybe I wasn't expecting the highs to be as high as we saw week one, and I wasn't expecting the lows to be as low as we saw week two, but I think that we entered the season knowing that Justin was going to be a very inconsistent quarterback. And for the New York Jets this season, one of the key things with Justin Fields is to not have the lows be so low. And unfortunately, they failed that Sunday. We've seen Justin Fields play good games in the NFL before. What we haven't seen him do is play good games consistently. And what we haven't seen him do is moderate his bad games. On Sunday, Josh Allen had a pretty bad game by Josh Allen standards. It was not a great vintage Josh Allen performance, but he still made plays. He broke that 40-yard scramble on the first series. I think Buffalo got away with a hold on that one, by the way. I went back and watched the film, and I came away. I criticized the Jets on Sunday watching it live. After watching the film, I think Buffalo may have gotten away with a hold on that Josh Allen scramble, but Allen also hit key passes through various points of the game. And there's a difference between a Josh Allen bad performance and a Justin Fields bad performance. A Josh Allen bad performance still moves the ball. It still gives you a chance to put up points. A Justin Fields bad performance gives your offense no chance. So you've got to avoid the performances that are this bad out of Justin Fields, but he's not going to be that bad every week. In fact, I don't think he's ever been that bad through his career. I don't think you can count on Fields to repeat his career worst performance frequently. And all this means is that while there's not a lot to like about the Jets' offensive performance on Sunday, it's not something you're going to see consistently through the whole season. And we've seen horrible Jets offenses through the years where there was no hope. This is not going to be a record-setting Jets offense. This is not going to be a Jets offense that is top 5 in the league. And even after week one, I was saying that the Jets were not going to play at that level consistently through the season. But this is still a Jets offense that I think gives you reason to believe that they can put up points through the season. And it's not going to be the type of offense that ranks 30th in scoring, or the type of offense that we saw on Sunday. Unfortunately, I can't say the same things about the defense. Had you on the Locked On Jets podcast, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go to a lot of pessimism about the way the Jets are playing on the defensive side of the ball. And I don't really have answers for how you fix what's broken. And there's a lot broken. We'll talk about what's broken as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel the craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can list all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. And they're just simple things. I mean, if you're like me, you sign up for a streaming service and forget about it, and you end up losing money every month if you don't use it. Well, Monarch can help you through that and so many other problems. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Jets have played 2 games in the 2025 regular season. They've lost both. Today, we're taking stock of where things are with the New York Jets. In our first segment, we talked about why a dismal week 2 performance does not mean that the offense is completely lost. There are signs of hope for the offense. I wish I could give you the same level of optimism for the defense right now, but the defense is a complete mess. On offense, we can look back at week 1. And even though things did not go well against Buffalo week 1 showed that there's a formula for the offense to be successful. The defense has been a disaster. And unfortunately, it's been a disaster in different ways in the first 2 regular season games. In week 1, there was breakdown after breakdown in the secondary. And Aaron Rodgers was able to exploit that on his way to 4 touchdown passes. In week 2, the Jets could not stop the run. Now, if you compare this defense with what the Jets had as recently as 2 years ago, there's not as much talent. It's a challenge in the NFL to keep stocking your defensive talent. And there are lots of reasons for the Jets fall off in talent on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, it's in the NFL, you have to replace guys, and the Jets have traded away a lot of draft picks. Their cap situation has not been good. Some guys just naturally have to leave the team. 2 years ago, you had DJ Reed as your number 2 corner. 2 years ago, you had a lot of defensive line depth. You had Breece Huff, who the 10 sack guy, is a part-time player. Will McDonald was a part-time player as a rookie. Even one that we forget is Jamie Sherwood was the number 3 linebacker. He was kind of a situational player. And I think at the time we did not appreciate how good Jamie Sherwood was. But, looking back, he had a guy who was pretty much a starting level player as a situational linebacker. So the talent level has eroded to an extent. Still, at the top end, this is a good group. I mean, you look at some of the players on. You have 3 good defensive linemen. You have Quinnen Williams, you have Will McDonald, you have Jermaine Johnson. You have 2 pretty good linebackers in Quincy Williams and Jamie Sherwood. You have a lockdown corner in Sauce Gardner. Look, there are clear weaknesses on this defense, but a defense with this much top-end talent should not be this bad. But something's just not clicking. And part of it's the guys at the bottom are really bad. And one of the challenges without defensive line depth is you are going to have snaps where you just have guys who aren't that good in there. James Cook's 44-yard touchdown run. I watched the film on that. It looked like Leonard Taylor just got wiped out. And Leonard Taylor's a guy who I've spoke optimistically about over the last 2 years, but he's a backup level defensive lineman, and you just aren't getting high level snaps from the backup defensive lineman. If Quinnen Williams, Will McDonald, and Jermaine Johnson are all on the field, you have a good defensive line. You start taking those guys out, the Jets just don't have the depth that they had 2 years ago when it was one of the focuses of the team. Um, I think, if you look at the secondary, everybody other than Sauce Gardner is not good. So I'm not expecting this defense to be a top level defense, but I'm expecting it to be professional. And we just have not seen that the first 2 weeks. And at some point, if the Jets defense was middle of the pack, I'd say, okay, that's just a talent. That's just a talent thing. They've got high end players, but they don't have the supporting cast around them. But this should not be the worst defense in the league. And I think a lot of that has to go to coaching. It has to go to Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes. And it's always a warning sign when a coach's specialty is an issue. And for the Jets, not just the defensive side of the ball, but the secondary has been an issue the first couple of weeks. The Jets are not getting good safety play from Andre Sisco and Tony Adams. And unfortunately, Adams suffered an injury. So I guess Malachi Moore is going to get an opportunity. But he's likely to get an opportunity going forward. And the cornerback position, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the failed additions the Jets have made. But just something is not clicking. And it feels like the whole is less than the sum of the parts on this defense. You have to find the middle ground. Like, what are realistic expectations? Is it realistic to think that this defense is going to be as good as it was during the top days of Saleh and Ulbrich? Well, no, because the talent level is not what it was. But for a defense with Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner, not to mention quality supporting players, Jermaine and Will and Jamian and Quincy, for defense to be giving up 30 points every single week, I don't know what's going on. It just seems like guys don't understand their assignments. It seems like the instruction has not been of a high caliber, and there's nothing you can really hang your hat on. I mean, when the Jets traded for Harrison Phillips and Juwan Briggs at the end of the preseason, it sent a clear sign. The first clear sign was that they did not like the performances of the guys that they brought in during the offseason. Derek Noddy being one of them who was traded to Kansas City. But it was also a sign that the Jets were going to emphasize run defense because that's what Phillips and Briggs are. They're two really strong guys. I know Briggs actually had a sack when he brought down Josh Allen, and that was a pretty impressive play, by the way. One thing you hear a lot about Briggs from people around the Jets is how strong he is. The fact he was able to pull down Josh Allen by himself says a lot about his strength level. But these trades also show that the Jets were really focused on stopping the run, that this was what everything was going to be built around. And they went out there and got absolutely gashed by the Buffalo run game. It was a game where, again, Josh Allen, for Josh Allen standards, did not play that well. And of course, part of the reason the Jets got blown out was the offense was so inept. But I think that Justin Fields' struggles may have camouflaged just what a poor defensive performance this was, because you don't get to a situation where the game is pretty much over once the offense leaves its script without the defense playing really poorly. The defense could not get a stop in this game. And I think the thing that was most frustrating was coming out of the locker room for the second half. You knew the Jets were probably not going to win the game at that point just because they lacked the offensive firepower. But that's a point where you have a chance to make a stand, where you at least have a chance to temporarily spark something. You get a quick stop, a quick 3 and out. Maybe you bring a little bit of life back to the crowd, because you could tell that crowd at MetLife Stadium was looking for any reason to get excited. The crowd was looking for any sort of spark to try and will the Jets back into the game. And what happens? The Bills go out, they put together a 12-play field goal drive that, just did nothing to spark this team. And then, Jets offense gets the ball back and does nothing. Bills go another 14 plays for a touchdown drive. And that's just the type of thing that destroys your will. It reminded me of the Pittsburgh game last year when the Jets just in the second half showed no fights, and the Steelers just ran the ball at will late in that game. And the Jets knew it was coming; they couldn't stop it. Those are the types of things that really bother me. The fact that there was just so little fighting spirit in this defense, the breakdowns, the underperformances, and the lack of depth. There's just not a lot to like about this defense right now, and I don't really have any solutions. On the offensive side of the ball, I can lean on this offensive line. And with the two young tackles, there will be rough days. And with Fields at quarterback, there are going to be some days that are really bad. But I don't think the offense is going to look like that every single week. This defense, it's time to go back to the drawing board, because I can't figure out how a unit with this much top-end talent can look this bad. And we're not talking about a middle-of-the-pack defense. We're talking about a defense with Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner headlining it that looks completely inept, that looks like the worst defense in the NFL. Tough to believe. And I wish I could give you something to hang your hat. I wish I could give you something that gives you hope. I can do that with the offense. I can't do that with the defense right now. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll move our attention to the front office because 2 games is way too short of a time period to evaluate how well a team's doing when it comes to personnel in a definitive way. But there are some warning signs that we can at least take from the first 2 weeks from the lack of production the players Jets brought in this offseason. And we'll discuss that as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel fits however you want to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. And of course, the Jets are heading to Tampa Bay this weekend, their first road game of the season. It's against the Buccaneers. And unsurprisingly, the Bucs are 6.5-point home favorites. This game has an over-under of 44.5 points. If you want to get in on the action, there's no better place to do it than FanDuel. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday. We're talking about first impressions for the 2025 New York Jets. Now, I want to put out a disclaimer before we begin this segment that I am not by any means offering definitive sweeping conclusions on the job performance of Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji as they build this roster. These are only first impressions. But I think that when we talk about first impressions of this team's personnel decisions, there's not a lot good to go on right now. You look at the moves they made this offseason. There were lots of moves that were what I would term trust me moves. And what I mean by that is these are moves that for the data you or I have, they were difficult to justify. And the hope was that you can trust the decision makers with the Jets, that maybe they have information that we don't. Sometimes a guy's just a bad fit for his former team, but he's a better fit for you. Sometimes, you look at a draft pick and it seems like a reach, but the player just is a good fit and the team understands his work ethic. The team understands there were mitigating circumstances that prevented him from producing in college. He's going to be a better NFL player. An inordinate number of the Jets' moves felt that way this offseason. And none of them are really working out. In fact, none of the players the Jets brought in are really working out at this point. And, I think you'd start with the first trust me move of the offseason. That was bringing in Brandon Stevens from Baltimore. And, you could go back to what we said in March, that there was no real way to justify the amount of money the Jets gave Brandon Stevens based on his Baltimore play. So the hope had to be that there was something in the film that they saw that made them think, what, we can unlock this guy. Well, through 2 weeks, Stevens has not unlocked. Stevens has been a liability. And even in a game, I mentioned that by Josh Allen standards, that week 2 game against Buffalo was not a great Josh Allen performance. Even in that game, Stevens was having trouble covering. One of the things that I found really odd about the decision to bring in Stevens is his lack of ball skills. And when you have a number one corner like Sauce Gardner, I know Sauce maybe lost once or twice in the Buffalo game, but teams are hesitant to attack him because they know of his talent. They know of his ability. And that means your number 2 corner is going to see a lot of action. So if your number 2 corner is going to get a lot of targets thrown at him, he's got to be able to make a play on the ball. And that's not something Stevens can do in the least. And I've heard this odd sentiment from some Jets fans that I don't really understand. People say, well, he'd be better at safety than he would at corner. I don't get it from the standpoint that Baltimore tried him at safety and he wasn't very good at it early in his career, but watch the James Cook touchdown run. Now, I'm not saying this was Stevens' fault because, corners typically don't have assignments in the run game, but look at the angle. I mean, go back and watch that footage. You don't even need to do the coach's film. You could go to X and just type in Brandon Stevens, and you could. I'm sure someone will have posted a video of the James Cook 44-yard touchdown run. Go back and watch the angle he took and the lack of effort he made trying to tackle Cook. And it wasn't really his assignment, but still, I mean, I don't know how you look at that play and come away thinking that Brandon Stevens could play safety effectively. This move looks like a colossal free agent bust right now, and that's a really bad sign, because the trust me moves are the moves that I think really in many ways set apart whether a front office is quality or not quality, and that's a really disturbing sign. I think. Look, I'll admit this was a signing I liked. Andre Cisco has not worked out, and in the Buffalo game, took a really bad angle on the Elijah Moore touchdown that were more, they gave the ball to Moore on a jet sweep on the goal line. It was a terrible angle by Cisco. Second time he's done that, by the way. He was responsible for a touchdown on an Aaron Rodgers pop pass last week. He did not play well. Cisco was benched last year in Baltimore. Again, like I got to take some heat for this one because I like that signing at the time. That one's not panning out either. The other thing that's bothering me about the front office right now, though, is that outside of Armand Membu, they are getting nothing from this draft class. And let me clarify what I mean by that. That does not mean I'm giving up on any of these players, but you also have to acknowledge that not everybody is going to be able to develop. So what you want a couple guys. You want 2 or 3 guys who look good right off the bat, because that of the other guys, hopefully 1 or 2 develop. So if you have 2 or 3 guys who are playing really well right off the bat, you look at the rest of your draft class. Okay, if 1 or 2 of these other guys develop, we're in good shape. If only 1 guy's playing well, and that's Armand Membu, and he's the top 10 pick, so that was kind of the easy pick. If he's the only one that's playing well, and you look at the rest of your draft class and you say, well, maybe one or two of these guys will develop. Well, even if 1 or 2 develops, you're not really getting what you need from a draft class. And again, there were some real trust me picks in this one. I think the number one was Arian Smith, who has not given the Jets anything. And, a 4th round pick, I understand that. But my issue with Smith is that it seemed like a consensus that Alec Iomanner was a far more reasonable pick for a wide receiver at that point in the draft. He was a guy that kind of slid. The consensus was that he was going to go higher than he did. He fell all the way to the end of the 4th round. Well, Iomanner's looking pretty good so far for the Tennessee Titans. He just had a good game. He just put up 4 catches for 56 yards on Sunday. While Smith is not really giving you anything. And even some of the later picks, like Tyler Barron, that was one where, a lot of people were questioning why they made that specific pick. It felt kind of a little early, even though it was maybe the 5th round. It felt a little early to go for a prospect like Tyler Barron. And Barron's a guy who very well may have been cut in training camp if he was not a draft pick. I want to moderate this because I know it's only 2 games. But the moves that worried you with this front office, these were the moves that were kind of like the head scratchers. They've done nothing to alleviate the concern about these moves the first 2 weeks. They've looked every bit as head scratching as they did at the time the Jets made the move, because these guys are just not producing right now. And look, this is very, very early stages. What I compare this to is, you remember in school, you did not get your report card until the end of the semester. But along the way, you had progress reports, so you could see how you were doing. And doing poorly on the progress report, that was not necessarily a sign you were going to fail the class. But if the progress report was not good, you realized we got some work to do. We got some things to clean up. And I think that the early progress report, our first progress report from the moves the Jets made, has not been good. There are some things to clean up, and there are some things to improve. And we'll keep our eye on this going forward. But that's not, it's tough to like what you've seen from this front office so far, because the results have just not been there. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow, we will have our weekly mailbag. I look forward to answering your questions.